Welcome back to another exciting bourbon and wine filled episode of Heritage Cafe.
Oh,
Uh,
whiskey and wine sounds so much better.
Whiskey and wine just got that nicer flow to it. But
Yeah.
I'm a bourbon guy. Whiskey actually makes me physically ill. Um, I don't know what it is about the very slight, like I can't drink Jameson.
Well, isn't it a grain difference? I don't really know the difference. Is it a grain difference in bourbon to whiskey, or is it the way that it's stored in barrels, or what?
Yeah, it's got to be something like that. Drop it in the comments because I know that people get real heated about the difference, but I couldn't tell you what exactly they are.
Okay.
Um, so this episode, we decided to feature cooking with alcohol, which is something that's very, very common in recipes. Uh,
Which
but the
I'm sorry, I was laughing because who doesn't cook with alcohol? Oh, you didn't mean what was in my glass. Oh, okay.
yes. Alcohol being put in the food itself,
Got it. Got
not
it.
being
Yeah, yeah,
used as a kitchen aid. So the idea was to make two identical or very similar dishes using a bourbon or a whiskey and a wine, just to kind of emphasize the difference between the two different kinds of alcohol in cooking and the way it responds to what you're cooking and the ingredients that are in it, and how it influences the flavor as well. So we
right.
went very different ways. You want to tell us what you made?
Well, I decided to do like a beef stew, which I suppose is a beef bourguignon, if that's the right way to say it, which is just beef with burgundy, right? But I decided to do a basic beef stew, real simple, onion, garlic, carrots, beef broth, really simple, of course, stew meat. And then I did all of my aromatics and everything in the same pot all together. And then I separated them, added the alcohol, and then let them cook slow because I wanted it to be the same. But I didn't know how to translate the amount of wine, which the recipe I was using actually called for a half a bottle to be
Okay.
then concentrated and used, but I didn't want to wait to do all the concentrating parts, so I just dumped half a bottle in. I didn't know how to translate that to the bourbon. I couldn't put, what was it, like 300 milliliters or something of bourbon? That seemed excessive. So I just kind of poured. And then I was like, maybe it needs more. I poured a little bit more and I let them set. And we did a blind test when it was all over. Well, my husband did a blind test when it was all over. And very, very different results. Let's just say that the chickens got a little boozy the next day because one of them was not edible.
Oh, that
Can
bad.
you guess which one?
I'm gonna guess based on beef stew that I've made that the whiskey version was not good.
You are right. I think cooking with alcohol, some of the things that that you see is that it's a late addition to a dish so that it has time to get rid of the alcohol, but it
Mhm.
also doesn't overwhelm the dish. And I think either I used way too much bourbon, possible I used wild turkey, might have been way too
Yeah, yeah.
much. um, I also wonder if it did need to have some time to concentrate down, so that the flavor had more of the actual bourbon flavor in it. Interestingly, the bourbon did not tenderize the meat. In the red wine dish, and I used a cab, it that meat was so tender and the dish was so aromatic. The house smelled like in a wonderful Italian restaurant somewhere. It just, I suppose I would be French, but anyway, you know what I mean? It just smelled so good. And I could have taken way more of the red wine and not of the bourbon. So we fished the meat out of it, but everything else was really a goner.
It was
So
just
it,
not
it
good.
got fed to the chickens.
Interesting. Interesting. Might make for good eggs.
Maybe. We did actually get 3 eggs the next day when we haven't been getting many eggs because of it being winter and everything. So maybe that's what it takes. So I definitely would not make the bourbon in the beef stew again, at least not the way I did. I think I might try adding it later, maybe use less, maybe a different kind of bourbon, but I definitely do the red wine. It was easy, really easy to do. So I would definitely do that. How about you? What did you do?
So I went a very different direction. I made dessert. We made chocolate cake. So scoured the internet for recipes. I found recipes that were called for red wine and recipes that called for bourbon. So I spent a lot of time thinking about the flavor profile to create a single recipe for the cake that was interchangeable with the alcohols. I did not do that with the icing. I probably should have, because the icings were incredibly different. But starting with the bourbon cake, I used Bullet, and then just like a box of cake mix, and eggs, which here are like crazy expensive for no reason. So these were very expensive cakes. But just mixed it up and really used the bourbon instead of water for the most part in the cake itself.
Perfect.
So really didn't throw off the recipe too much. I was just kind of exchanging flavored moisture for non-flavored moisture.
Right.
So it actually worked pretty well. The bourbon cake physically looked more like you'd expect a cake. It rose better. It looked like what I would think a cake should look like. And then I ended up making almost like a icing glaze, more of a frosting than
like a ganache, like a
it didn't turn out at all like I thought it would. It was very light brown, very, very bourbon forward. Incredibly.
So you had bourbon in the frosting.
Yes.
So
overall, pretty good. The cake was moist. It tasted good. The frosting is just a little too much alcohol forward. It needed more sugar. So if I were to make it again, that's a change I would make. But my favorite, and I think the favorite of the group, we ate them during football, was the red wine cake. And I also used a cab. And that cake didn't rise quite as nicely, but the flavor was phenomenal. It was more moist, but not like to the point where it was wet. And the red wine complemented the chocolate incredibly well. So I made a mistake. I was making the frosting for this cake and melting down dark chocolate chips, and my dark chocolate chips weren't melting. I couldn't figure it out. And then you smell burning, and I left the cake tin on one of the burners. And which burner do you think I was using?
Oh no!
So the red wine cake ended up being about half the size because I had to cut off the whole bottom because it was burnt through from sitting on the burner for I don't even know.
Oh my god!
But I made a very different frosting. This was dark chocolate and red wine and a lot of powdered sugar. Very good. Very, very good.
Actually, it sounds really good.
And cream cheese. So it ended up being almost like a shell after I had put it into the fridge. So it's very satisfying to eat, and the flavor is really, really good as well.
Wow. I wonder if with the red wine, if there isn't just enough fruit pieces in there that it made the cake heavy. It couldn't rise because all those extra pieces of, wine in there, the fruit, the grapes and stuff, the must, all that, like maybe it made it too heavy.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I cooked them at the exact same time in the same oven because I wanted it to be as similar as possible. The cakes are supposed to be identical.
Right.
And then the differences was in the frosting. So I don't know. I'm using an electric oven. Maybe it wasn't heating equally. I don't really know. Both cakes were good. So they can look funky if they want. And like I said, the red wine one ended up being a dwarf cake because I had to cut the thing in half. But
That's too bad
overall,
because it's the
good.
one you liked better.
Yeah, and I'm not a huge chocolate guy. I'm not a huge sweets guy. So we still have
Yeah.
3/4 of two different cakes, and we're never going to
Leftover
get through them.
chocolate? What? Your mother should be there. Like, that's horrible. That's a waste of food.
Well, and
And
our friend makes
eggs.
these. Yeah, our friend makes these wonderful rum cakes, and she brought one of those over. So there's like 3/4 of a rum cake and 3/4 of two different chocolate cakes, and I can't get through it all. And so we'll see. We'll see how long it lasts. That might be the final comparison between the two. Is
There you
which one
go.
keeps
Yeah.
better unrefrigerated because they're in the microwave.
Oh, well, I'm glad you have that new storage system called the microwave again. That's
Yep. Yep.
But one of the things that occurred to me too about the red wine versus the bourbon and the tenderness of the beef is the tannins that are in that red wine and how it does start to break things down. And maybe if I had done a marinade instead, like with the bourbon, maybe that would have broken down some of the fibers in the meat a little bit better. But I don't think I'd do the bourbon stew again.
Well, and I think what it kind of shows with your recipe and with mine is that you probably shouldn't adapt red wine recipes to bourbon.
Right.
Not exactly a one-for-one change. So, maybe
Yes.
if we had similar recipes, maybe both would have been more successful. But definitely cooking with red wine is, I guess, older. The recipes are more developed because people have been doing it for longer.
Right.
Maybe
Well,
that
there's
plays
also,
into a little bit, but
I don't know. I almost felt bad though, like pouring bourbon into the stew. It seemed like a waste of the bourbon, to be honest. Like I would rather just drink the bourbon than have to dilute it in the stew. So maybe that's what I'll do in the future.
well, and bourbon with stew and bourbon with chocolate cake both sound like a winning strategy to me.
But not together, right?
Correct. Correct.
Right. All right. What do we got coming up?
That's a really good question. And if you would wax poetic for 30 seconds, I will pull it up.
Oh, well, I know, but I don't want to be a know-it-all, like telling you what we're doing,
Oh,
Yeah.
it. Then by all means, let me and the audience know because I can't remember.
We're doing Africa.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, we're doing Africa. So that's going to be fun, different, and exciting. And I'm doing North Africa, I think.
Yeah, and I have West African cuisine. So I've got a couple recipes pulled that I want to draw from. But now that I'm in the Phoenix Valley, I actually have found a little grocery store that I might be able to get some authentic ethnic ingredients.
Awesome.
So,
That'd be great. I think you need to do some investigation too. Maybe go out to eat some places where you can try some African food that you might want to replicate.
I think it would be irresponsible not to.
I do. I agree.
So that's what we have on deck.
And please, we need the comments in there, like to give us an idea of what we're doing and how we're doing it. And there was a question. We had a question at the beginning of this for our viewers.
Yeah,
I can't remember what it was.
Difference between whiskey and bourbon.
Oh, that's it. Yeah. See, short-term memory, it's gone. It's just forever gone. All right, so this has been the Heritage Cafe, where we cook to connect.
And it's always more than a recipe. We'll see you
See you
next time.
later. Bye.